Your Excellency, Your Eminences, a very warm welcome to the Romanian Culture Institute in London. My name is Aura Woodward, I'm the Director of the Institute. It is indeed very special for all of us here to celebrate the first official translation into English of Nicolae Steinhardt's Journal of Joy, Jurnalul Fericirii. It's a book which has shaped generations of Romanians like me who were born under communist dictatorship. This great Romanian classic was written in the late 60s and confiscated by the infamous Securitate before being finally published. The Journal of Joy, published at the St. Vladimir Seminary Press, New York in 2024, was translated by Paul Boboc and revised by Peter Andronache, with further revisions and notes by Peter Andronache, Bogdan Bucur, Nicolae Dragoshin, Brenda Mikitic and Răzvan Porumb. Here in the UK, at the moment, the book is available electronically only on Kindle. We do have a few copies for you, for your perusal later, and hopefully we'll be able to have the book itself later on as well. Tonight we will have individual presentations and a round table discussion moderated by Father Dragoș Herescu. We are still waiting for one of our panelists, and we hope that he's going to arrive on time, that the program will carry on. First, though, I would like very much to invite our wonderful ambassador to the United Kingdom, Her Excellency Laura Popescu, to address the audience.
Thank you very much, Laura. Your Eminences, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a joy to welcome you to this event celebrating the very first official English translation of Nicolae Steinhardt's Journal of Joy, Jurnalul Fericirii. My sincere gratitude to the Institute for Orthodox Christian Studies in Cambridge and to those whose dedication has brought us together this evening. Thank you for the care and clarity with which you have carried Nicolae Steinhardt's voice into English. This event is more than a literary celebration. It is a bridge between cultures, between faith and resilience, between Romania's deep spiritual heritage and the wider world. We celebrate an impressive book, but also the liberation of a testimony long silenced. Reading Journal of Joy was, for the younger me, 30 years ago, a transformative experience, a revelation, I could say. Nicolae Steinhardt doesn't write from comfort or ease. He writes from a prison cell, from suffering, from the margins. And yet, from that darkness, he radiates light. Steinhardt's words, written in secret and banned for decades, bear witness to a paradox. That joy can be found in the most joyless of places. That spiritual freedom can exist even when all liberties are stripped away. The Journal of Joy redefines the idea of freedom and faith, reminding us of the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. This translation gives English-speaking readers access to a landmark of Romanian spirituality, an authentic voice that dares to speak about forgiveness, transformation, and hope in the face of repression. As Steinhardt wrote, this is the Journal of Joy, a joy founded on the resurrection, unconquerable by the manifest powers of death. His reflections are more than historical, they are timeless. And now I warmly invite you to join the conversation and to take part in the debates ahead and to explore together the enduring relevance of Steinhardt's message for our world today. Thank you so much again for being with us this evening.
Good evening. My name is Father Dragoș Herescu. I'm the principal of the Institute for Orthodox Christian Studies in Cambridge, and I'm delighted to extend a very warm welcome on behalf of the Institute to you all. Your Excellency, Madam Ambassador, Bishop Rowan, distinguished audience. My role here this evening is twofold, and one is to just say a few words of thanks to a number of people, and then to read a message from Archbishop Athanasie, the Romanian Orthodox Archbishop for Great Britain and Ireland, recently appointed and installed, and then to offer a very brief introduction to our main speakers this evening. I'll try to be as brief as possible so we do not delay the main event. Now, as I said, I want to offer my thanks to Her Excellency, Madam Ambassador, for her support and heartfelt endorsement of this event, and also to our friends here at the Institute, Cultural Institute, and also to the Romanian Embassy for being wonderful hosts and wonderful partners in the warm-up to this event. I also want to extend thanks and offer recognition to St. Vladimir Seminary for co-organizing this event with us, again in this sense, and for their initiative to work on the translation of Father Steinhardt's book. It's wonderful to have Father Bogdan Bucur here with us, one of our speakers, and Dr. Alex Tudorie, the president of St. Vladimir's Seminary as well, coming from the States. We hope that this is the beginning of a rich institutional and personal collaboration, certainly between St. Vladimir's and the Institute, and maybe further afield. I especially want to thank Bishop Rowan Williams and again Father Bucur for accepting this task of being our main guest speakers this evening. Thanks are due also to Rohia Monastery for their role in this project, and we're delighted to have here the abbot of the monastery, the Very Reverend Archimandrite Macarie Otogda. Father Macarie, wonderful to have you with us. I will now read the message of His Eminence Archbishop Athanasie on the occasion of the book launch of Father Nicolae Steinhardt's Journal of Joy in London. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, beloved brothers and sisters in Christ, Christ is risen. Though I cannot be with you in person today, I send my sincere greetings and convey my joy on this significant occasion, the launch of Father Nicolae Steinhardt's Journal of Joy, now for the first time officially translated into English and presented with a comprehensive critical apparatus. My thanks go to St. Vladimir Seminary and St. Vladimir's Press for taking on this important translation project and bringing it to fruition, and also to the Institute for Orthodox Christian Studies in Cambridge, in collaboration with the Romanian Embassy in London and the Romanian Cultural Centre, for organizing this important event. The availability of Father Steinhardt's Journal of Joy to an international audience is a moment of great importance. For too long, the valuable spiritual wisdom contained within these pages has been largely confined to the Romanian language. This meticulous translation, accompanied by a critical apparatus, not only makes Father Steinhardt's insights accessible to a global readership, but also provides the necessary context for a deeper understanding of his unique theological perspective. It is clear that his words transcend linguistic barriers, and I commend all involved in this significant undertaking. At the core of this remarkable book lies Father Steinhardt's transformative prison experience. Confined within the harsh realities of a communist regime, he discovered a profound and genuine joy, powerful witness to the resilient spirit of faith in the face of suffering. The Journal of Joy is not merely a chronicle of hardship, it is a theological reflection shaped by personal experience. His witness, tested by persecution, reminds us that true joy is not dependent on external circumstances, but is a gift from God, found in a person's personal encounter with Christ, even amidst the harshest of human tribulation. Finally, I extend my sincere commendations to Father Dragoș and the Institute for Orthodox Christian Studies for their part in bringing this translation to fruition, and particularly to Dr. Răzvan Porumb, whose insightful foreword significantly enriches the reader's understanding of Father Nicolae's text and of his historical context. The Institute's commitment to organizing and promoting this event, and indeed making better known Father Steinhardt's work and personality, is highly commendable. The Institute for Orthodox Christian Studies stands as an important center for Orthodox theological education and mission here in the United Kingdom, and a valuable hub for ecumenical encounter and dialogue. As we are still within the Easter period, I pray that the joy of the resurrection fill your hearts and homes, and may the wisdom of Father Nicolae Steinhardt continue to inspire and illuminate us all. Thank you. Well, it gives me great pleasure to say a few words about our speakers, and I'll do that now. The Right Reverend Dr. Rowan Williams. We're honoured to have with us Bishop Rowan as our first speaker today, and it is with great pleasure that I will briefly introduce him. He is a distinguished theologian, academic and poet, widely known for his tenure as the Archbishop of Canterbury from 2002 to 2012, where he navigated the challenges of a global communion and with characteristic wisdom and grace. He has also held other prominent academic positions, including Master of Magdalen College, Cambridge. Bishop Rowan is a scholar of profound intellectual depth. His work engages with the complexities of Christian theology, philosophy and literature. His contributions to theology have shaped across various Christian traditions, even different faiths and none, the way many of us perceive God and our relationship with Him in Jesus Christ, as well as how we consider contemporary issues, from the role of religion in society to issues of inequality and social justice, to war, the climate and ecological crisis, and indeed ecumenical relations. A fellow of the British Academy since 1990, he published numerous books, which include, I'll just mention a few, on Christian theology in 2000, and most recently, Looking East in Winter, Contemporary Thought and the Eastern Christian Tradition in 2021, Passions of the Soul last year, and Discovering Christianity, a Guide for the Curious in 2025. So we're very privileged to have you with us today, Bishop Rowan, and look forward to hearing you speak. Father Reverend Professor Bogdan Bucur represents Vladimir's Seminary Press, today the publisher of the Journal of Joy. Father Bogdan coordinated the teamwork and that produced the English translation of this book. A native of Romania who came to the United States in 2000 for graduate studies in theology, Father Bogdan is currently Associate Professor of Patristics at the St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary in New York, where he also serves as an Orthodox priest. He has a special interest in the link between the reception history of the Bible and doctrinal developments in early Christianity and the Byzantine tradition, considering how early Christians articulated their religious identity by reworking doctrines, imagery, and practices inherited from the many currents of Second Temple Judaism. Father Bogdan has published extensively, and I will only mention his most recent book, published in 2019, Scripture Re-envisioned, Christophanic Exegesis and the Making of the Christian Bible, and his 2024 article entitled When the Most Blessed Athanasius Was Opposing the Arians, the Defense of the Nicene Faith Refracted Through an Augustinian Lens, an article which rings very topical in this year's celebration of 1700 years since the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea. Father Bogdan, we are so pleased to have you with us and excited to hear your contribution this evening. Last, but certainly not least, my very dear colleague, Dr. Răzvan Porumb. He is the Vice Principal and Director of Research at the Institute for Orthodox Christian Studies. He is the author of the foreword of this English edition, as I've mentioned, of the Journal of Joy. And he is also the author of a very good book, which I recommend, Orthodoxy and Ecumenism, Towards an Active Metanoia, that came out in 2019. And of many other journal articles and essays, many of which have been devoted to the work of Nicolae Steinhardt. Without any further ado, I will hand over to Razvan for a few remarks and then to our speakers. Thank you very much.
For many of us gathered here, neither the Journal of Joy nor its author need much introduction. When the book is mentioned, countless Romanians, young and old, respond with deep emotion. They say things like, "This is the book closest to my heart, e cartea mea de suflet," or "This book has brought me to faith." Still, I'd like to share just a few words about Nicolae Steinhardt and this extraordinary, unique book. Nicu Steinhardt, later known as Father Nicolae Steinhardt, after he became a monk at Rohia Monastery, was born in 1912 near Bucharest into a well-off Jewish family. He studied law, earning both his bachelor's and doctoral degrees in the 30s, and soon began a writing career that included mostly literary criticism, but also philosophical essays, political commentary, satirical pieces, etc. His life was marked by suffering under two oppressive regimes. First, he was persecuted as a Jew during Romania's fascist era in the 1940s. Then, in the 1950s, he was targeted again, this time by the communist authorities, who sought to silence intellectuals who were reluctant to accept the communist ideology. When he refused to testify against his friend, philosopher Constantin Noica, in one of the regime's notorious show trials, he was sentenced to prison. From 1960 to 1964, he endured brutal, degrading conditions in several prisons. Yet it was during this darkest chapter that he made a life-changing decision. He chose to become a Christian. In a secret baptism performed by a fellow prisoner who was a priest, Steinhardt entered the church, a moment he describes with affection and a sense of wonder in the Journal of Joy. This book, published initially 2 years after his death, became a sensation in Romania. It spoke to the Romanian society of the early 90s, not only to the power of faith, but to the transformation of suffering into light. The book became, in a sense, part of a difficult process of coming to terms with Romania's past. As a person, Steinhardt was something of a Don Quixote, appearing to come from a chivalrous, distant past, and being generally a bit of an eccentric character. He was a man of vast learning, madly in love with literature and the arts, possessed of an inquisitive spirit that led him to avidly read anything from literature to philosophy to science, etc. As the title of this book suggests, his defining trait was joy, a childlike restlessness, an enthusiasm and vivacity that stood in stark contrast to the grim totalitarian world around him. That joy, we find out, was born of a mystical encounter with God during his time in prison. Now, what kind of book is the Journal of Joy? Not an easy question. It is not a book devoted solely to spirituality. The Journal of Joy works, in fact, on several levels. It is a novel which recounts the story, told in non-linear fashion, of the author's experience with the oppressive communist regime and his subsequent prison sentence. It is a book of Christian spirituality, as its author's reflections on faith following his prison baptism do sketch the outline of a theological vision. A great variety of memories intertwined with stories and sometimes seemingly random thoughts and reflections, as well as snippets of prison conversations, seem to validate the book's title and give it indeed the appearance of a diary. It is also a book of literary and artistic, or more generally cultural, reflections, coming from someone who was primarily a literary critic and an avid art lover. What makes Steinhardt's spirituality so striking and so relevant even today is its deep openness to both Romanian but mostly universal culture. He was passionately receptive, eager to bring together voices from across the intellectual and artistic spectrum, whether or not they came from a Christian context, and to weave them into the fabric of Orthodox theology. In this sense, his work could be seen as displaying a kind of ecumenism through culture. Also, in many ways, the journal is a plea for freedom, something that was in short supply during the totalitarian communist era. We can perhaps say that having faced the dictatorships and broken utopias of the mid-20th century, the Journal of Joy makes a return today with a quiet but powerful warning. From the perspective of Christian faith, it speaks to the dangers of authoritarianism and repression in our time. Once again, in many parts of the world, people are drawn towards paths that risk leading us back to autocracy and even totalitarianism. And in an age when the Christian message is so often reinterpreted, sometimes distorted, to serve many different agendas, perhaps the voice of someone who met Christ in a godless place of suffering and oppression can offer us a new perspective on the enormous value of freedom, on the inspiring role of cultural and ecumenical openness for living a Christian life today. Now, this new edition of the journal in English has been the product of a long and complex process. Those of you familiar with the Romanian text may already be wondering how Steinhardt's idiomatic, archaic, sophisticated phrase could be converted into English. To say nothing of his thousands of references to world literature, philosophy, music, history, or science, which now have to be explained to a 21st century English language audience. Starting from Mr. Paul Bobok's heroic work of translation, the erudite, multifaceted character of the journal further required a whole team of people working in unison for 4 full years on the minute revision of the English text, making sure that Steinhardt's complex, colloquial, often humorous turn of phrase has maintained the exact meaning as in the original. It also required a team of people to write the references to the multitude of names, events, books, etc., which led to a staggering 1,751 footnotes, which also explains the unusual girth and weight of this current edition. However, what could have been a tedious, arduous process was felt to be instead by the editorial team, and I think I'm allowed to speak on their behalf, as a profoundly gratifying experience, almost as if Father Nicolae himself, with his infectious lightness and joy, was also a part of the group. Father Bogdan, here present, who coordinated this team effort, on top of his already busy academic schedule, may have lost a few years of his life, but I know he also experienced this process as a blessing. Rarely have I personally been involved in a working group as cohesive and dedicated, and entirely devoid of any ego as this wonderful group of people, which also included Father Peter Andronache, Dr. Nicolae Drăgușin, Mrs. Brenda Mikitish. For this achievement, St. Vladimir's Seminary, represented here also by its president, Dr. Alex Tudorie, whose support and encouragements were felt throughout, deserves to be congratulated wholeheartedly. Therefore, let us applaud their work before giving the floor to our very special guest today and our very dear friend, Bishop Rowan Williams.
Your Excellency, Reverend Fathers, dear friends, Christ is risen. I must begin with an expression of deep gratitude, both for the introduction to Father Nicolae's work and for the opportunity this evening to speak about it as a newcomer to this new world with enormous gratitude for what it has offered me. And what I should like to do in this very short time available is to pick out a few of the themes that have most struck me on my first, I suspect first of many, reading of this extraordinary work. The thing that most immediately strikes me, as it must, I believe, strike any Western reader, is the global reach of this imagination and this intellect. Here is a writer who is very deeply European, and yet not in a narrow way, not in an exclusive or hostile way. Here is somebody whose imagination and intellect have been nurtured by the main streams of European thought and creativity over many centuries. Here is somebody, in fact, who can make Orthodox Christianity seem entirely at home with that mainstream of European culture. An achievement, I have to say, not always shared by every single Orthodox theologian one encounters, but very much to the fore here. And I begin, therefore, by making a couple of small comparisons between this work and the work of two other writers who, in my own life, have been of particular significance and importance. One of the themes which emerges very clearly in Father Nicolae's work is the importance of courage. Again and again, he returns to the notion that the lack of courage is one of the things that drives us finally into slavery. And he speaks here not about courage as spectacular heroism, but a steady, realistic, shrewd awareness of what is in front of your nose. Having, you might say, in fact, a nose for lies, corruption, dishonesty. And the writer that reminds me most of is Mikhail Bulgakov in The Master and Margarita. Cowardice, the worst of all failings, is a phrase that is repeated many, many times in that extraordinary novel, I would say, being provocative, possibly the greatest novel of the 20th century. Because cowardice is finally a moving back away from reality, from truth. Both in Bulgakov's great novel and in this journal, cowardice is what makes us less than we are, what makes us less human than we are. Cowardice is what allows the victim to become a collaborator in their own humiliation. And some of the most poignant and harrowing pages in this book are about the ways in which a totalitarian regime can make a population its own jailer, can make people complicit in their own enslavement. To read this book in that light is to understand how the experience of baptism is here an experience of standing against that kind of cowardice, refusing to be complicit in your own slavery, taking authority to lay hold of the freedom that is offered to you as a child of God in the body of Christ. So the echoes of Bulgakov's great novel, the echoes of that wonderful, chaotic, hilarious, moving fantasy about Stalinist Moscow, those echoes are to me very strong in these pages. But there are echoes of another great writer of the last century, whose career in some ways reflects aspects of Father Nicolae's life. And that is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the 80th anniversary of whose execution we are celebrating this month. And I don't speak here simply of Bonhoeffer's stature as a Christian witness and martyr. I speak once again of one particular theme in his writing. Bonhoeffer at one point says, in a phrase that has puzzled many readers, that the Word of God is aristocratic. The Word of God does not stoop to conquer humanity by vulgarity, by the offer to go along with our most selfish and deluded wants. The Word of God is supremely, joyfully, confidently itself. And the Christian believer ought to have that kind of aristocratic quality. A freedom from pettiness, a freedom from vulgarity, that is, from collusion with all the worst and most degrading elements in our makeup. An ability to shrug off some of the taint and compromise of the world. A humour, an irony, a liberty of spirit, what the Italians call sprezzatura. The capacity to sit lightly, to feel deeply, to feel seriously, and yet to sit lightly. Bonhoeffer's own life and his own character were very much marked by just that. And it's precisely that kind of sprezzatura which the reader will sense in this book. A seriousness of purpose and depth, and a lightness of touch and liberty of spirit. So you can see perhaps why I put Nikolai Steinhardt alongside those two very different and very remarkable 20th century writers. And I would hope that with this book being available in English, he will come to be bracketed much more readily with those giants than he is at the moment, because he amply deserves to be. But let's go back for a moment to this theme of courage. It's connected in a rather strange way with what he has to say about one particular kind of crisis in the political and ethical life of the 20th century. He has some words about comments ascribed to Lord Halifax, the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom in the years of the Third Reich. And he quotes Halifax as saying that he had no locus standi to condemn Nazi Germany. No, says Father Nikolai, that is a false humility. We have every right to condemn tyranny and inhumanity. And it's an entirely false charity, a false modesty, to step back, especially if you have a public responsibility, like Lord Halifax. Step courageously into that role. Be clear about the kind of world you are living in, because justice demands no less. He has some interesting things to say about this. I'll, if I may, quote one or two passages that struck me particularly on this. He quotes C.S. Lewis, of all people, from the Screwtape Letters. You remember that in the Screwtape Letters we have a step-by-step analysis of how diabolical temptation works. And he quotes one particular example. The hero of the Screwtape Letters would like to have a cup of tea at 5 o'clock on the porch. His wife and mother-in-law would rather drink it inside. Give in, the devil whispers to him. Be humble and good, altruistic, sacrifice yourself, do as they want. So the man drinks his tea with them, and he feels unhappy and unfairly treated the whole time. The drink is stuck in his throat. He curses both women, who in turn see full well that he has conceded to them grudgingly, and they feel enmity seize them. The devil rejoices. 3 victims in sight. What should the mortal have done? He should have not gone too far down the road of virtue over an insignificant issue. He should have recognized his limits. He should have said openly and simply that he preferred drinking his tea on the porch, even alone. The women would have stayed inside, he outside. Everyone would have been satisfied. The spirit of sacrifice lacking good judgment, put into practice where it had no business to be, would have been defeated. Realism, true humility, as opposed to false. Accepting, articulating your limits, saying where you stand, and not, in scriptural phraseology, trying to be righteous overmuch. So, this allows for Nikolai to speak about challenges he's received himself from friends who told me that I lacked humility and compassion for a poor old man, that if I refused to be a witness to the prosecutors, to give statements and re-educate myself, etc., it was out of pride alone, and perhaps I would have agreed with them if I had not been well edified regarding the heresy of false humility. Isn't this humility, which is the same as the intent to perpetuate human vileness, to forbid the human being to go outside of it and transcend himself, isn't it itself a paradoxical kind of pride? Complicated ideas. But what I read him as saying is that humility is one of the things that needs most discernment, irony, and realism. He can be accused of taking a stand against injustice in too public, too prominent, too individualistic a way. But no, says Steinhardt, no, he does so because not to do so is to collude in degradation, and you can't do that. But there is such a thing as false humility, and we need an eye for that. It's a humility that's not reconciled to its own limits, that postures, that dramatizes, and eventually compounds the evil and the untruth of the situation. So much to disentangle there, but the subtlety and the challenge of all that he writes is extraordinary, I would say. It's just a little bit connected with another theme that comes back, not unlinked with the whole principle of the aristocratic response, and that is where he talks about the evil of stupidity. Christians, he says, have no vocation to be stupid. Quite the contrary. Intelligence, not academic intelligence, not theoretical intelligence, but intelligence, moral and spiritual intelligence, is part of how life in the spirit unfolds. And we do no service to the gospel and to Christian truth by pretending otherwise. To cultivate intelligence, critical awareness, self-awareness, a sense of the ridiculous, all of that is in fact, rather surprisingly, part of holiness. So before we even start speaking about the substance, the deep substance of Christian faith, we have, I would say, in these pages, a profoundly searching anthropology, a vision of what is human, a vision of the limits and the possibilities of humanity, a clear sense of our call to resist degradation, trivialization, and above all, that collusion with our own enslavement that totalitarians love. We also are encouraged to feel the sense of our own ridiculousness, our own limitation, as well as our own glory. And all of that has a great deal to do with what has already been mentioned today, and that is the significance of freedom. A freedom which is most certainly not a shapeless capacity to do what you want. A freedom which is clarity of vision. A clarity of vision directed towards the truth that will set you free. The Christian is free and therefore happy. This is the meaning of Kierkegaard's brilliant and inspired statement. His obsessive hold on me, I can't escape. The opposite of sin isn't virtue. The opposite of sin is freedom. What does he say then about faith itself? He turns, unsurprisingly, to Dostoevsky. If God didn't come down from the cross, it is because he desired to convert man not through the compulsion of an obvious external miracle, but through the freedom to believe, and by giving him the opportunity to show his boldness. There's an insight. The invitation to faith is actually an invitation to show a certain kind of courage, a certain kind of human resolution, dignity, and creativity. When they said to the Lord on Golgotha, "Save yourself and then we'll believe," the mistake was in fact on a linguistic level, their judgment being based on a confusion of terms. If he had come down from the cross, there would have been no need to believe. Only the recognition of a fact would have taken place. We are asked, in an invitation to audacious bravery and thrilling adventure, for something more mysterious and more strange, to contest the evidence and to trust an unfact. He works in roundabout ways, impenetrable ways, say the French, and the English, even more precisely, he moves in a mysterious way. So mystery is part of what invites us into the adventure of faith. Mystery, instead of being one of those things that we turn to when we feel ourselves in a tight corner, it's all a great mystery, don't ask me any further. Instead of mystery being the thing that closes down our discourse, mystery is what opens it up. Mystery is what tells us there is always more to be said and thought and imagined. And where the infinite God is concerned, how deeply true that is. To say that God is apprehended as a mystery is not to say in a passive and resigned way, so we can say no more. It's to say with wonder, we can never say enough. So, on mystery. The Patriarch Athenagoras says of Russian religious philosophers that they combined the sense of mystery with that of freedom. Aren't freedom and mystery the very notions that atheists are trying to get rid of? And after their banishment, stupidity and tyranny bide their time, waiting for their opportunity. Almost the same thing with Olivier Clément. The rediscovery of the East and West is needed to prove that only mystery can illuminate life. The sense of mystery not only does not hinder or impede the search and thirst for knowledge, but impels them. The only thing they disturb is haughty stupidity, which believes that it knows everything and that it has found the panacea for unbelievably complex human problems and anxieties in a couple of formulas, applied with the help of the police. Mystery is a beginning, not an ending. Mystery is an invitation, not a refusal. Mystery as the summons to freedom, not to passivity. One of the problems in speaking about this book is, of course, that it is endlessly quotable. And if I quoted all that I'd like to quote from it, that is, on average, something from every one of the 672 pages, we would be here all night, and probably we shouldn't be, because we all ought to be going home and reading it. But just one final quote, which again strikes me as typical of this utterly fresh, unexpected, you might say daring approach to the great tradition which he inhabits so deeply and fully. The strange contradiction between the Old and the New Testaments. In the Old one, although the Almighty depicts himself as a stern God, vengeful to the seventh generation and lawgiver of the talion, after he allows the devil to test Job in all these ways, he intervenes in the end to restore justice. The much-tried Job reacquires his health and wealth and dies rich and full of days. The God of implacable law proves himself merciful in the end. Not so in the New Covenant. Here Christ is not just tested, he allows himself to die on the cross. The angels don't descend to save him as they did Isaac. The martyrs die in torment like their teacher. The God whose mercy was unveiled to human beings and who carries them from under the curse of the law to grace, unexpectedly acts unspeakably more harshly. There seems to be just one explanation. Before the incarnation, souls couldn't be saved. Souls went to hell, even those of the righteous. It follows that the divinity owed it to them to repay their good, at least here in the world. But after Christ descends with his soul into hell, the situation is different. The heavens open up to human beings, and they can now know eternal joy. It's no longer necessary for the reward to occur on a material level. And the terrible reality of the world, where all is pain, unfairness, and suffering, can be disclosed in all its fullness and left to unfold until the end, to the end of the night. And there's another reason. With the coming of the Lord, we passed from childhood to maturity. We can be told the truth. We can be spoken to openly. We can be fed with meat, not milk. The Christian, summoned to faith, courage, honesty, justice, sees more clearly than ever what a nightmare the world is. The Christian, living in the joy of the resurrection, trusts until the end of the night. To be baptized is to be brought into that adult maturity, that strength and depth of vision, which is the ultimate source of freedom. Without that, as he says, it's stupidity all the way down. And without going into any details, there's no shortage of evidence of that around us these days in our globe, which is why this book, in whatever language, is so important for every potential reader worldwide, and why it is such a grace and a joy to see it appearing in this wonderful translation. Thank you.
I often wondered how to begin to read this book, where to enter into this world that Steinhardt presents to us. And sometimes the Securitate has proven useful in some ways, because in a written declaration that Steinhardt gave on December 14th, 1972, to the secret police, after the dreaded Securitate had confiscated the manuscript of the Journal of Joy, Steinhardt describes this text as an attempt, he says, to clarify to himself what he calls a profound spiritual process, namely his religious conversion and Christian baptism, generated from that ineffable experience of light and joy, akin to sharing a meal with the risen one on the road to Emmaus, or at Emmaus, or encountering him on the road to Damascus. That kind of experience, ineffable, generated, according to Steinhardt, the over 500 pages or so of the Journal of Joy. Because the journal, to him, is a sort of afterglow. Hundreds and thousands of bits of observations about the prison experience, as well as the wider nebula of associated thoughts, insights, memories, hopes, and aspirations, all illumined by refracting and echoing the light and joy of that central experience. And if this is so, then let us here find our beginning. He writes, "I am born again out of wormy water and a swift spirit. Whoever was christened as a child has no way of knowing and cannot imagine what baptism means. Above me dawn ever more frequent assaults of joy. One might say that each time the besiegers climb higher and hit with greater relish and precision. So it's true. It's true that baptism is a holy mystery, and that holy mysteries do exist. Otherwise, this happiness that surrounds me, fills me, clothes me, overcomes me, wouldn't be so unimaginably wonderful and whole. Peace and a sweetness in my mouth, in my veins and my muscles, a sense of absolute certainty. A mescaline-like merging into everything and a perfect departure into clarity. Revelation 21:5, is proven true. Behold, I make all things new. New but ineffable. I cannot find words except for trivial, stale ones." A little over a year later, he documents a similarly overwhelming experience I call it a dream, he says, at some point, because I dare not call it something else. In recounting it, however, he does refer to it as a vision. The light surrounds me on all sides. It's total joy, and it does away with everything. I am bathed in blinding light. I float in light. I am in light, and I exult. I am, the light says to me. I am, and I understand through my intellect and by means of feeling, I understand that it is the Lord, and that I am within the light of Tabor, that I don't merely see it, but also dwell in its midst. Over and above everything, I am happy, happy, happy. The joy not only lasts a long time, but also constantly increases. If evil has no bottom, then goodness has no ceiling. The circle of light grows ever wider, and the joy, after it has enveloped me silkily, suddenly changes its tactics, becomes firm, throws itself, collapses upon me like avalanches that anti-gravitationally lift me up. And then again it proceeds otherwise. Tenderly it cradles me, and in the end, bluntly, it replaces me. I no longer am. No, I am, but so strong that I no longer recognize myself. Evidently, this is not the hieratical language of Byzantine Lives of the Saints, whose carefully curated vocabulary does not include terms such as mescaline, avalanches, and anti-gravitational ascent. Nevertheless, the theological conceptuality is deeply traditional. The state of ecstatic suspension between being himself and being other than himself evokes Galatians 2:20. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the light that illuminates from within no less than from without, identified as the Lord Jesus Christ, but speaking the words of the divine appearance at the burning bush, recalls passages from the Macarian homilies, from Simeon the New Theologian. The bold statement, I understand that it is the Lord, and that I am within the light of Tabor, is, I think, to be read not only within its immediate context, but also as part of a cluster of references to monastic hesychia, even hesychasm, uncreated energies, and the famous dialogue between, on the acquisition of the Holy Spirit between Saint Seraphim of Sarov and Motovilov. It is also noteworthy that Steinhardt finds it important to assure his readers that he had treated the alleged vision with the skepticism required by the ascetical tradition, and had shared it with the saintly hieromonk Haralambie Vasilaki. In short, the experience itself fits squarely within the venerable tradition of Orthodox spirituality, of Christian spirituality, stretching beyond St. Simeon the New Theologian and St. Gregory Palamas to Seraphim of Sarov, the 20th century figures of Archimandrite Sophrony of Essex, or Elder Emilianos of Simonopedra. Moreover, Steinhardt had, with the invaluable help of a dear friend, Virgil Cândea, and his vast library, become increasingly and robustly familiar with the ascetical and mystical literature of Christianity East and West. He had available, at the very least, Dumitru Stoinuloai's 1938 monograph and translation of 3 treatises from St. Gregory Palamas, as well as the first 4 volumes of the Romanian Philokalia. Cândea recalls his friend's voracious appetite for reading just about anything, as we've heard, but also the increasingly disciplined and methodical study of theological and spiritual literature. This apprenticeship in the Christian spiritual tradition started years before the so-called trial of the intellectuals, and resumed with greater intensity upon his release from prison. So I think it is safe to assume that this bookish knowledge offered him the vocabulary with which to give an account of his overwhelming, invaluable, ineffable experience of Christ. This mystical experience left an unmistakable ethical trace, crystallized into a number of memorable, clearly articulated ethical mandates that validate genuine spirituality and offer us much needed orientation today. As he comes to state as a monk in the late 1980s in his short Orthodox creed, the Taboric light and joy necessarily engenders an ethos of joy, benevolence, courage, moral intelligence, and civility, he says, in the circumstances of everyday life. Joy is, as is evident, part of the description of the ecstatic state associated with baptism. But it erupts again, and with the same associations with the Christian tradition, hesychasm, uncreated energies, palamas, and so forth, in Steinhardt's narration of the grace-filled forgiveness and reconciliation with a former member of the anti-Semitic Iron Guard. I'm quoting. He tells me he is sincerely sorry that he had been a legionnaire. He asked for my forgiveness. Perhaps it is unbearable for me to stay with him and so close together. I responded, I don't see why he mentions forgiveness to me, because if that's what we're talking about, I also should ask his forgiveness, because I'm a Jew and he has to stay glued to me. Waves of joy wash over us, flood us, overwhelm us. I ask Sandu, the ex-legionnaire, and if I copy Saint Seraphim of Sarov in the forest scene with Motovilov, I do so unintentionally, whether he sees on my lips the smile that I spy on his, that of hesychasm, having its origin in the uncreated energies. Joy, for Steinhardt, an important marker of true spirituality, is cultivated as part of an everyday ethic, ethics of thoughtfulness, kindness, benevolence, courage, a Christian formula that excludes any self-righteous, morose, pseudo-religious zealotry. Fundamentalist fanaticism, he writes, of any kind, is repugnant and feels daft to me. The monk zealously employing fundamentalist fanaticism is only masquerading as a Christian and is an Orthodox estranged from the faith that he is supposedly professing and witnessing. Our faith has always been known for its steadfastness, but also for its distaste towards anything that is not grounded in Christian kindness and in our forefathers' discernment. When it comes to courage, another side of what Christianity should look like, according to Steinhardt, his account pays homage to his elderly father, who should be mentioned, I think, every time we speak about Steinhardt himself. Like the midwives in the Exodus account are given names so that we can remember their names because of their courage. Oskar Steinhardt, on the night before his son's arrest, shines as an unconventional icon of courage. Says Steinhardt, my heart is heavy. Dad, however, in his pajamas, tiny, chubby, joyous, is full of smiles and dispenses last pieces of advice, like a coach before the bout. They told you to not let me die like a dog? Well, if that's how it is, I tell you what, I'm just not going to die. I'll wait for you. And you. Now listen to me. Don't embarrass me, he says. Don't be a scared Jew. Don't shit your pants. He kisses me emphatically, leads me to the door, stands up straight as for a salute, and he salutes me in military style. Go, he says to me. And Steinhardt goes, and the Black Volga takes him away. The Journal of Joy insists that Christianity isn't sheepish, and is in fact a religion of courage. Steinhardt observes the following scriptural detail. Among those men for the lake of fire in Revelation 21, who comes first? The cowardly. But courage is not only to be proven in extreme situations. Steinhardt's recipe for daily life calls for the following. Ask, demand, knock, dare, don't be afraid, don't be frightened, persevere, charge, be awake, be of sound mind. So many exhortations, abundantly showing that it doesn't behoove us to be stupid. And with this, we discover another facet of Christianity according to Steinhardt. Intelligence. Steinhardt quotes with delight from St. Bernard of Clairvaux, it does not become the bride of the word, the bride of wisdom, to be stupid. And he states emphatically that Christians should not confuse faith with stupidity. And the quote is just too good to pass. Nowhere and never did Christ ask us to be stupid. He calls us to be good, tender, honest, humble-hearted, but not idiots. The Lord loves purity, not imbecility. For the one who is blessed with the gift of understanding, stupidity, at least from a certain point onward, is a sin of weakness and of laziness, and of not using your talent. What he has in mind here is a sort of willful and therefore culpable intellectual and moral self-amputation. He says an elementary intelligence is a duty. Ignorance, idiotization, blind passage through life and through things, or passing indifferently, are from the devil. This kind of intelligence or clear-sightedness also includes a certain sobriety and lucidity, which allows one to see through and not to be taken in by seeming benign disguises of evil. Steinhardt, for instance, cannot agree with priests that he mentions by name, some of whom have been canonized, and people he loves and admires and has learned from a lot. He cannot agree with priests, he says, who glorify the edicts of the police in regards to haircuts, girls' skirts, and so forth, who make haste with ardent words of praise to approve the moral measures taken by some totalitarian government, the abolition of prostitution, the prohibition of abortion, the complication of divorce. They have in mind, I believe, more the letter and the harshness rather than the spirit in which such measures are grounded. One should not, he says, strain the gnat and swallow the camel, see the mote and conceal the beam, tithe cumin and dill, and conveniently neglect the terror and the lie cast upon us, and forget that the Spirit cannot blow except where there is freedom, and where virtue issues from free choice. Christians must always remember that the true truth, as it were, is the truth that is relevant, which is usually the truth that a dictatorship will not allow. He puts the matter very clearly. When people are being sawn in two right next to you, announcing that 2 and 2 make 4 means that you must scream at the top of your lungs. It is an injustice crying out to heaven that people should be sawn in two. And therefore, giving lectures at the university, quote, that Goethe wrote poetry and truth, that Voltaire died in 1778, or that Balzac, ladies and gentlemen, is a romantic realist, while the professor's former colleagues are being tortured in the Gulag, or publishing respectable studies about the historical ills of Uniatism in Transylvania at the time when Byzantine Catholics found themselves stripped of their legal status and their bishops imprisoned, or to engage in a sound doctrinal critique of Jehovah's Witnesses at the time when these people are being jailed and persecuted. All of this he finds without the slightest hint or malice or disrespect, but also without the customary beating around the bush. These are his words. Frivolous, ridiculous, and lacking in Christian and human decency. Steinhardt is also keen on deflating any dreamy talk of heroic striving forward on the path of holiness, ascending from glory to glory, and emphasizes instead the blessing of modest, even ridiculously modest gains. The saints are the limit. Next in line, though, come the heroes and the knights, and lo, trailing behind them, come limping along, somewhat ridiculous, puffing and puffing, the daring stalwarts of the good, who are not to be disregarded. And he writes in a version of the Journal of Joy, the Rohia manuscript, let us therefore confine ourselves to being what we are, and what we can be, impostors of the good. In other words, even if our thoughts are teeming with the most abject impulses, and our inner pride shames us, let us nonetheless strive to do good, unworthy as we are, impure, half in bad faith, half in good, hypocritical and conflicted, plural, irreducible to unity, unstable and complex. Yes, all of this we are, of course, yet still not cringing, gladly servile, resigned slaves of evil. In a time when too many Christians, and speaking as an Orthodox priest, I can say too many Orthodox Christians, seem to have considerable difficulty with fairly basic tenets of the faith. Do not lie, do not steal, do not kill, do not take the Lord's name in vain by claiming to kill in defense of the faith. In a time when too many seem to have learned their faith at the feet of the Grand Inquisitor, and too many are being catechized by his propagandists, Father Nikolai Steinhardt's embodiment and articulation of the gospel remains as it was when the journal was written. It was and is deeply subversive. In reading Steinhardt, one learns that if Christian spirituality, mysticism, however you want to call it, is to be genuine, it must always be certified by its corresponding ethical trace. As Christians, we are called to live not by lies, whether lies we accept, lies we tell ourselves, lies we tell others, to remember that ours is a faith that demands and empowers us to be courageous, to cultivate kindness, patience, and a sense of humor, to deepen our commitment to Christ and at the same time practice an intelligent, civil, and generous assessment of the world around us. It is with all of this in mind that I declare myself deeply grateful and overjoyed that Steinhardt's Journal of Joy is now able to speak to a new generation and in a new language, bearing witness to the truth that even in the midst of bitterness and darkness, it is worth binding ourselves to Christ and allowing Him to give us the joy of being, for now, impostors of the good, and to save us despite ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for 2-3 wonderful presentations. I might have to make an executive decision, which I always like to make. So I think we only have about just over 15 minutes until the time that was allocated for this event. I mean the formal, certainly the formal side of it. So I think it would be a wonderful way to allow the speakers to have a conversation with you, those present here in the public, and I will ask them to each take a seat, I think here on the podium, please, if you would, and I will be not the grand inquisitor, but the great moderator, the harsh moderator, and I will try to stick to the time. And as I said, we welcome questions from the public and from you. Do keep your questions to the point, short, as are the best kind of questions, so we can hear more from our guests, our speakers. Okay. While you take a little time to consider a question, if I may just start and ask. It's a question for the panel, but maybe I suppose start maybe with you, Bishop Rowan. I mean, Father Steinhardt wrote, as we all learned and we know now, in Romania in such a particular context, and you spoke eloquently, all of you, about his relevance today. But how do you see him being relevant, let's say, in the UK context today? How do you see him, Father Bogdan, in the United States, where you are an active priest? I would like to hear your thoughts on this.
Perhaps above all, the relevance is in the way in which he characterizes the nature of faith. No need to apologize about mystery. Mystery is good news. Mystery is the opening of a door onto some unimaginable agenda possibility. No need to present ourselves as anxious about constantly patrolling our borders and constantly, if you like, making sure we've got our resources in the bank. Communicating that supernatural joy, communicating the fidelity of Jesus Christ, communicating something of that absolute freedom of spirit, that lightness of touch. I look at my own church and other churches in the UK and I see a great deal of things other than that lightness of touch, freedom of spirit. And I read this with such deep gratitude for the way in which it opened those doors.
Thank you.
Maybe something about intelligence, the way he sees it, and we try to explain this. Had he lived, he would have had a lot to say in the 90s in Romania. Had he lived longer still, he would have had a lot to say, I think, about world events today. But he would have been odd. He would have been subversive. Maybe he would have been defrocked. I don't know. But stuff like this does happen. And it does because he draws the right conclusions. There is a necessary link between experiencing Christ genuinely and behaving a certain way. For him, he says at some point, claiming not to know, not to understand, is not an acceptable excuse. And he was speaking at that time about the release of political prisoners who were flooding back to their towns and villages, and of whom everybody knew. These were unbroken people coming to a society that had been broken and domesticated, let's put it this way, enslaved, and who were uncomfortable people. And people said, we didn't know about internments, internment camps, about torture and all of this. I've heard this, and you have heard it too, I think, about the war in Ukraine. Do we really know that what is going on, or does the fog of war really obscure things? Are they really coming from suffering? Should we receive them? Should we trust them? We don't really know. After all, the media makes things up and obscures things. Yes, well, as he said, and I'm glad to quote, I didn't know is not a valid excuse. Everybody knows, though everybody claims not to know. And this is how it was, this is unfortunately how it is. And his witness in this respect and many others would have been very uncomfortable and very much on point.
There's a question here.
How does Steinhardt reconcile the paradox of finding joy with suffering, in particular in the context of political imprisonment and spiritual trial?
I think the first thing is that he doesn't offer us anything like a theory to reconcile. He simply says, I know that in suffering I have met joy. It's possible. And I suppose that's really the heart of what he's saying throughout the book. I'm telling you it's possible. And that extraordinary passage I read at the end, where he says, Christians, as it were, don't need to have a happy ending tied up in this world because they believe in a God whose fidelity, his faithfulness and giving extends beyond death. We can take it, we can face the reality, knowing already in anticipation that the light is there and is not extinguished. So I don't think he's giving us any kind of philosophy of this. He's giving us witness. And that's the distinctive thing here. Anyone can write a book about the problem of suffering, and it won't stop people suffering, and it won't stop people suffering because people are suffering. What makes the difference is witness.
Just to add that Steinhardt is fully aware that it's paradoxical, the joy that he has experienced, that he experiences. And his vision is that Christianity is a recipe for happiness. He defines it, he even says it like that. So for him, Christianity brings joy. So much joy, in fact, that in prison he feels this impulse during the night to just run around, wake everybody up. He can't sleep because of joy in prison. And I think that his message is that the joy that the encounter with Christ brings happens despite everything else. So even in prison, even in the darkest of places, the power of Christ, as it were, overwhelms the environment, the evil, sort of environment. So he just brings Christianity as a solution, but not necessarily, linking it to suffering in the sense of, this is how you turn suffering into joy, but rather that joy defeats everything else. That's how I would see it.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question, and let me see if I managed to actually formulate my thoughts properly. This book is kind of like part of a larger strand of literary tradition in Romania of people who have gone to prisons as political prisoners. But Steinhardt is also part of another tradition of people who have suffered in prison and whose relics are now, in Romanian churches. So they are new saints of the church, of the Romanian church. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the theology of Steinhardt and how he sits within the wider transformation of Romanian society in Christianity. I mean, I'm talking particularly about Christianity and the renewal of our society.
At the risk of saying something subversive, I think it is significant that he has not been one of the persons selected, though it's not at all the case that he would not be considered, so he's under consideration. But there is something about the way he writes and the way he expresses himself that is so free. It's just difficult to deal with. To some extent, canonization is also a process of fitting a person into a sort of stereotypical way of seeing things. It doesn't reduce the persons, of course, but it makes a certain icon of them. And I think it'll be difficult to have the icon and the akatist of Blessed Nicolae Steinhardt without leaving out things that somehow don't fit. On the other hand, he would also be, I think, very, very convincing, especially perhaps to people who are not necessarily easily convinced by the more stereotypical forms of holiness. As you've heard, Madam Ambassador, you said that this was one of the books that for many Romanians was the beginning of returning to faith. In my own case, it was the conviction that it's still worth remaining committed to Christ, despite what a cynical person might see in the failings of the church. And so this is a particular kind of saint, particularly interesting. But he doesn't render himself easily instrumentalized, which is often the case. And because of this, I think he poses a very, very good challenge to Orthodox Christians, to Romanian Orthodox Christians in particular, but I think to Christians in general. And wrestling with this is itself a gift of his personality and a gift of God through him.
I would also say that Steinhardt firmly refuses the mainstream. He was not, he prefers subversion. So yes, it is odd to think of him as part of the mainstream sort of group of people who have suffered in communist prisons. I think of course also because of the communist censorship, he had to sort of go the roundabout way to insinuate things, to sort of make hints, more, well masked in whatever he wrote, even in literary criticism. But I think that on the whole, even when it comes to the theology of the church, he would still prefer the subversive role. I have a feeling that that was one of his defining traits, and one of his strengths, really, that he, and the fact that he chooses, as it were, culture and literature to define his own sort of brand of theology, if you like. that's very telling. He doesn't go about the usual way. He always goes the roundabout way, and I feel that that's his strength, and I would like it to stay that way myself.
Just two very quick thoughts there. One is the great American activist Dorothy Day apparently once said, "I hope they don't make me a saint. I don't want to be written off that easily." Because sometimes to declare somebody a saint is to draw the sting, to make them a bit less troubling. So I think that's something that's going on here a bit. The other thing is, of course, these pages, as from you point out in introducing this, these pages show us the extraordinary moral complexity of Romanian politics in the 20th century and cultural politics in Romania in the 1930s and early 1940s, which is such a tangled and, in many ways, compromised, painful story. He comes out of that world. He's not somebody without ambivalent associations. And that's actually all the more credible as we read it. Here's somebody who has not been on the sidelines, who has made mistakes, who has affiliated with people that probably we prefer he hadn't been affiliated with at some points, and yet emerges. And that subversive clarity comes out of all that ambivalence, and that adds rather than reduces the stature, I'd say. So yes, maybe don't make him a saint. We don't want him written off too easily.
I really think we only have time for one final question, the big question. So I saw Margaret raising her hand first. There will be an opportunity once we sort of descend for refreshments to continue the conversations, to continue asking questions, and to exchange ideas and opinions on this. But Margaret, you have the last question.
Thank you. I'm very grateful. I really love the emphasis on culture, and as someone who I'm trying to read more theological books, but as someone who just loves reading novels, I love all the references, and the team that worked on the footnotes, 1,750 of them. It's an amazing job that they did. I just wondered whether you felt that kind of that idea that you find Christ in everything, in all culture, in the whole world, however people are expressing themselves, whether you thought that was important in the way that he expresses himself. Is he writing for a cultured audience, or is he encouraging people to engage with culture, or perhaps both?
I would say both. I would say that he's assuming a cultivated audience, but he's also sort of attempts to inspire, I think, and to give a signal, as it were, that that's part of the journey. It's not something that is to be neglected or something that is not of great importance, but there's something that's even essential. And we can see with the depth with which he engages with a lot of these works of art. I was reading just a few days ago, I think it was in the journal, that he went to see a film. Films, by the way, it wasn't just books. He was an avid film lover, and he went to see The Leopard, a film by the classic Burt Lancaster, and he had written the book first. One of his colleagues in prison told him, as soon as you come out of prison, read this book. So he did so, and then he went and saw the film, and it was funny that he said, as always, when I like something too much, I cried throughout the film, the whole film, and then I had to go see it again without the tears so that I understand what it's about. So this level of engagement, it's like he takes it very seriously, and I think it's very inspiring for the 21st century world to sort of really consider how important culture is in our journey of faith, particularly as there are attempts to sort of keep it out. And this also explains a little bit why Steinhardt isn't incredibly popular with church hierarchy. I mean, he's perhaps in a sense more popular with the people, with just regular people who love reading interesting things. And then they discover faith through it. But I would say that the church kind of keeps keeps Steinhardt at an arm's length, and I think he would love that position.
He wrote, as I mentioned, he wanted to have a book of sermons because he was giving sermons from time to time, as blessed by the abbot of Rokia. The collection of sermons under the title of Giving You Shall Receive, we hope to have the blessing of the monastery to publish in translation. It should have been maybe a very welcome intro to Steinhardt. But the point is, a very different medium. Sermons in a remote monastery and the Journal of Joy. But the attitude is the same. So he can refer to Jesus Christ Superstar and find it valuable and find it to be the bearer of something extraordinarily important. Some detail, some attitude, some line he finds. He's extraordinarily generous. That's what I meant by a generous assessment of the world. A little bit like a Justin Martyr or Clement of Alexandria in early Christianity would have read everything they could, especially Clement, and turn it into something that announces or embodies fragments of the logos of the word. Similarly, and in the sermons as well, there are sermons in which he quotes some work by some novel by Mircea Eliade, not his scientific work, mind you, but some fiction work. Or he references some mathematical equation to speak about monasticism, negative numbers, I don't know. I mean, all these kinds of connections that he makes in the sermons as well, and they're very accessible. So it's a matter of attitude that he can very easily dial up in terms of cultural density, or dial down and make more accessible. The attitude is important, and it is a kind of orthodoxy that is very convincing, very compelling, at least to some.
Very quick comment. I quoted one of his passages where he cites Olivier Clément, and there's a passage from Clément on the back of the book, very appropriately. He exemplifies much of the same spirit, I think, in the Orthodox world. But I guess the most fundamental thing is what's really already been said. If Christ is who we say Christ is, then we need not panic when we look at the world around. And I think what Steinhardt is saying, in effect, is when you look at that world, don't look away, look deeper.
Well, it gives me great joy in thanking a panel again, our speakers again, in thanking the organizers here. And I would urge you to give them a round of applause for today.